What would you do if the people you thought would become your family laughed at the one person you've lost forever? That's the question I keep asking myself, even now, months later, with the ring still tucked inside a drawer I haven't opened since that night. They say families are complicated. Mine wasn't. I had one person. Just one. And they laughed at her. It was supposed to be a celebration. Chloe had spent hours organizing the dinner. The table at her parents' house in Connecticut was immaculately set, with folded linen napkins, vintage wine glasses, and steak knives that probably cost more than my entire monthly rent. Her father wore a blazer with gold cufflinks, and her mother, gliding around in heels like a hostess from a Martha Stewart spread, greeted me with a kiss on both cheeks. I smiled through it all, clutching the frame in my purse like it was armor. I had brought a small photo of my mom, Linda. It was the one I always traveled with, worn at the corners, but still perfect to me. In the picture, she's standing outside our old apartment building in Queens, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, holding a homemade birthday cake she barely had the money to make. She was smiling that soft, exhausted smile she wore after working 2 shifts back to back. That photo had seen me through college applications, late-night panic attacks, and job interviews. It was more than a photo. It was her. So when Chloe gently placed it on the side table next to the wine rack and said, "This should be part of the night, too," I felt my chest swell. That moment felt safe. Like she really saw me. But safety doesn't last. Dinner started with casual banter. Her older brother Max was talking about some investment deal, and her sister-in-law, Jenna, chimed in with passive-aggressive digs about people who still use coupons. I chewed my filet mignon slowly, trying to stay small, unseen. Then came the moment. Her father had just refilled his wine glass when his eyes drifted over to the photo. "Oh, what's this?" he asked, squinting. Chloe smiled awkwardly. "That's Emily's mom, Linda." He picked up the frame and examined it like it was a flea market find. "She looks earthy," he chuckled. "Reminds me of our old cleaning lady." Same vibe. No offense. The whole table erupted in polite, indulgent laughter, except me. My fork froze midair. My breath caught in my chest like a sob I couldn't let out. Jenna leaned in, smirking. "It's sweet, though. You must have been close." "She looks like someone who made great mac and cheese," Max added, "or meatloaf." "I bet she made a killer meatloaf." Chloe laughed too. Just a soft, nervous laugh, but it was there. I saw her glance at me, just for a second. Maybe checking if I was okay. But she didn't say anything, not one word. I excused myself. In the bathroom, I locked the door and stared at myself in the mirror. My hands were trembling. I wanted to scream, to throw the photo frame across the marble floor. Instead, I just sat on the edge of the bathtub and held it in my lap. Linda's eyes stared back at me, calm, kind, and full of quiet strength. I could hear their laughter still echoing down the hallway. I thought of how Mom would have handled this. She wouldn't have caused a scene. She would have smiled and said thank you and let the insult slide off her like rain. That was her gift, grace, in the face of condescension. But I'm not her, and maybe that's a good thing. I returned to the table 10 minutes later. No one mentioned my absence. They moved on to dessert and wedding talk, vendors, colors, guest lists. I nodded along, smiled, laughed when I had to. I felt like a ghost watching someone else's life. Later that night, Chloe and I sat in the car before heading back to our apartment in Brooklyn. She reached for my hand. "I'm sorry about dinner," she said quietly. I didn't respond. They don't mean anything by it, They just don't know any better. That was the moment something inside me shifted. They don't know any better. As if that excused it. As if ignorance was some kind of hall pass to humiliate someone's dead mother. "They don't know any better?" I repeated. My voice was calm, but sharp. Chloe sighed. "They're just old-fashioned. You know that." "No," I said, pulling my hand away. "What I know is that you let them mock her. You laughed with them. I wasn't laughing at her, she snapped. I was trying to keep the peace. Keep the peace. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized I didn't recognize the person sitting next to me. And maybe I never really had. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Most people grow up with 2 parents, a backyard, and maybe a golden retriever. I had none of that. It was just me and Linda. She hated being called a single mom. Said it made her sound like a statistic, not a person. I'm just a mom, she'd say while folding laundry late into the night, who happens to be doing it alone. And she did every single thing alone. My dad died when I was 4. A car accident, icy road, a truck that never braked in time. I don't remember him clearly, just vague shadows, a deep voice, the smell of coffee, the feeling of being lifted high into the air. But Mom never let the whole swallow me. She filled it with presence. She was always there, even when she was exhausted, even when she was stretched thin from working 2 jobs and taking night classes, just to move us out of that basement apartment. She cleaned houses during the day and worked the register at a grocery store at night. I used to do my homework on a crate behind the customer service desk, listening to her call price check on aisle 5, while quietly humming along to whatever song was playing over the store speakers. But she made everything feel like it mattered. When I got a B on my science test in 6th grade and cried because it ruined my perfect report card, she taped it to the fridge anyway and said, "You tried. That's worth more than any letter." She showed up for every choir concert, even if it meant changing in the grocery store bathroom. She learned how to braid hair from a YouTube video because I wanted to look like the other girls at school. And when I asked her if we were poor, she said, "We're not poor, honey. We're just practicing gratitude every day." It wasn't just about what she did. It was how she made me feel. Like I wasn't missing anything, even when I knew we were. There was this one night, my 12th birthday, when it rained so hard that water started leaking through the ceiling. We had just finished eating spaghetti and canned green beans, and I was pouting because none of the kids from school had shown up to my party. I didn't even get to have cake. Mom disappeared into the kitchen for a bit and came back with a slice of toast, slathered with peanut butter and sprinkles. "It's what the cool kids in France eat," she winked. Then she turned on some music, an old Aretha Franklin track, and pulled me into the living room. We danced barefoot while rain dripped into buckets, and that was the night I stopped believing birthdays needed balloons to be magical. That's who Linda was. She didn't make life easier, she made it mean something. By the time I got to college, I was full of ambition and guilt. I'd earned a partial scholarship to NYU, and Mom picked up a 3rd gig doing laundry at a hotel to cover the rest. I offered to defer. She refused. "You go get the life I couldn't have," she told me the night before I left. "And don't ever apologize for being brilliant." She didn't cry that day. I did. She just waved and said, "Call me when you land." I called her every night. Every paper I got an A on, every heartbreak, every subway meltdown. I shared it all. I didn't realize then how much she was hiding from me. The exhaustion, the silent chest pain, the bills she was falling behind on. I didn't see any of it until I did. She collapsed one morning while folding sheets at the hotel. Heart failure. I was 21. She never woke up. I didn't know how to grieve. Grief didn't come in one big wave. It trickled in through the little things. Calling her number and hearing, "This line has been disconnected." Finding her old apron in a bag of laundry I never unpacked. Watching other girls shop for wedding dresses with their mothers while I stared at mine's closed casket. Everything I built after that, my career, my friendships, the apartment, the therapist I finally saw after I couldn't sleep for 3 weeks straight, was made on the foundation she laid. So no, I don't have a father who can cut me a trust fund check. I don't have a family who throws dinner parties with vintage wine and elitist charm. But I had Linda. And that was worth everything. That's why Chloe's family's comments hit so hard. They weren't just mocking some distant memory. They were mocking my everything. I had shared Linda's photo that night not out of sentimentality, but out of reverence. She was supposed to be a part of that dinner. A silent but powerful witness to the life I was stepping into. Chloe knew that. I thought she understood. But now, looking back, I wonder if I ever really let her see Linda. Or if I just hoped she would. People like Chloe's family don't understand what it's like to be raised by someone who had to fight for every inch of dignity. They don't understand how sacred that struggle becomes to those of us who lived it. Because when someone gives up their life so you can have one, mocking them is mocking you. And I finally understood, that night in that Connecticut mansion, staring at my mother's photo as it sat between a bottle of Cabernet and a bowl of imported olives, I didn't belong there. But more importantly, I realized I didn't want to. When I first met Chloe, she wasn't wearing diamonds or pearls. She was wearing jeans, a faded Columbia hoodie, and her hair was tied back with a green scrunchie that didn't match anything else she had on. It was at a volunteer fundraiser for a women's shelter in Brooklyn. I was managing social media and helping with setup. She was there to represent her firm, one of those fast-rising PR agencies with offices in 3 cities and a minimalist website that screams, "We're better than you." She offered to help hang the banners even though she was clearly more comfortable holding a cocktail than a staple gun. When one of the signs fell mid-speech, she laughed louder than anyone and owned it like it was a performance. Something about that moment stuck with me. She was magnetic. She carried herself with this effortless charm, like she belonged everywhere but wasn't trying to prove it. Later that night, I found her helping fold donated blankets and sort food kits, her heels kicked off to the side, barefoot on cold tile. "Not what you expected from a corporate type, huh?" she teased, noticing my curious glance. "Honestly? No," I said. "Well," she smirked, "then I guess I'm doing my job. I'm in PR, remember? I manage perception." I should have heard the warning bell in that. But I didn't. I just laughed and handed her a granola bar. We started texting the next day. Casual at first, memes, podcast recs, flirty banter, but something about her messages felt alive. She wasn't just texting to fill space. She was building a world I wanted to step into. Our first real date was at a food truck festival. She wore a leather jacket and tried to convince me that tacos were a valid first date meal. I was hooked. She listened, really listened. Asked about my work, my mom, the years I spent struggling to find stability after graduation. And when I told her I still had nightmares about finding out Linda was gone, Chloe didn't flinch. She just squeezed my hand and said, "You must be so strong." It was the first time someone hadn't tried to make me move on or look at the bright side. She just sat with my pain. In those early months, I felt seen in a way I hadn't in years. She encouraged me to pitch stories more boldly, to apply for roles I thought were above me. She showed up to my birthday with handwritten notes folded into a tiny wooden box, each one labeled "For when you're sad," "For when you need courage," and "For when you forget how amazing you are." It was thoughtful, personal, real. I met her friends, who were a mix of artsy types and finance bros, and they were surprisingly kind. I got used to the way her world operated, everything curated, everything in control. But Chloe never made me feel small in it. At least not at first. Looking back, there were signs. Little comments that brushed past me at the time. Like the night I brought over homemade soup when she was sick, and she laughed, "God, you're like someone's mom. It's cute." Or when I wore a second-hand dress to a gala and she said, "Vintage is such a brave choice." She meant well, always said things with a smile. But sometimes smiles cut deeper than scowls. The first time she took me to Connecticut to meet her family, I remember being overwhelmed before we even stepped out of the car. Her family's estate wasn't a house, it was a compound. Manicured lawns, 2 Teslas in the driveway, and a literal koi pond near the front steps. Her mom greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and her dad shook my hand like he was evaluating my market value. But Chloe made it okay. She rubbed my back during awkward silences, jumped in when the conversation veered into uncomfortable territory, and later whispered, "You did great," like I'd just passed a test. I started to believe I could belong there. We began talking about the future. Moving in. Marriage. Kids, maybe. She even said one night while we were lying on the couch watching reruns of Parks and Rec, "I want you at every table I sit at." It felt like love. The kind of love I thought I'd never get. The kind of love I saw other people posting about: perfect trips, lazy Sunday mornings, matching coffee mugs. So when she proposed on the edge of Lake George during a spontaneous weekend getaway, I said yes. Of course I said yes. She had planned the whole thing. A picnic by the water, a Polaroid camera, a playlist of songs I'd once mentioned in passing. And then she pulled out a ring box, hands shaking just enough to make it feel real. "I want you," she whispered. "Forever. Even when you hate me, even when we fight, I want all of it. With you." I cried. I kissed her. I said yes. That weekend, I called my best friend. I even whispered the words, "I think I found my person." But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't see through the rose-colored wine glasses and shared Spotify playlists, was that loving someone is easy when things are beautiful. The real test is what they do when the world gets messy. When their family insults the most sacred piece of you. When you're no longer a shiny accessory to their curated life, but a mirror reflecting what they've never had to understand. And maybe Chloe loved me for who I was, but only the parts she found manageable. The first real crack didn't split the ground. It whispered through the air, almost too quietly to hear. That's the thing about tension. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just lingers, like smoke after a match has burned out. The first time I felt it was at Chloe's mother's birthday party. It was a summer garden brunch at their family estate, the kind of event where the napkins matched the flowers and the champagne flowed like water. I had spent the night before panicking over what to wear, finally settling on a soft blue dress my friend Jules had loaned me. It was elegant, simple, but tasteful. As we pulled up the long circular driveway, Chloe looked over and smiled. "You look beautiful." I smiled back, trying not to fidget. I had gotten used to Chloe's world, the parties, the casual name-dropping, the artfully posed photos, but I still felt like a guest in it. A guest with a time limit. Her mom greeted me with her usual air-kiss warmth. "Emily, dear," she said, scanning my outfit. "You look so comfortable." "It's sweet." Chloe shot her a quick look, but said nothing. I told myself it was fine. I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there because Chloe wanted me to be part of her world. Right? The day passed in slow, glittering discomfort. Her mother's friends asked what I did for work, not out of curiosity, but out of calculation. "Oh, nonprofit work," one of them said, tilting her head like she was staring at a puppy. "That's adorable. So noble." Another asked, "Did your parents do charity too? Or is that more of a self-made thing?" I felt my stomach knot. Chloe put her hand on my knee, like a pressure valve, but didn't say anything. She never did. It wasn't always that overt either. Sometimes it was subtler. Like the way her brother Max always changed the subject when I mentioned my mom. Or the way Jenna, his wife, once asked, "Wait, your mom worked retail?" Like in a store, and then laughed as if it were a punchline. I brought it up to Chloe once, gently, after one too many wine-fueled comments from Jenna at a 4th of July barbecue. She sighed, brushing her fingers through her hair. "They don't mean it like that, babe. You're reading too much into it." "No," I said, "I'm not. It's not just one comment. It's a pattern." "Okay, but they're my family. I've been dealing with them my whole life. Trust me, they don't change. You either learn to ignore it or you go crazy." That stung. "Is that what you want me to do? Ignore it?" She didn't answer at first. Then finally said, "I just don't want you to get hurt by things that aren't worth your energy." But it was worth my energy. Because every time they looked down on me, they were looking down on her. My mother. My roots. My entire identity. It didn't help that the wedding talk had started ramping up. Not just between us, but with everyone around us. We hadn't even officially set a date, but her mom already had a Pinterest board. Chloe's cousin sent us a link to a venue in the Hamptons. Her dad mentioned covering a portion of the cost, followed by a not-so-subtle suggestion that we hire a planner who can polish things up. I felt like I was being swept into a machine I hadn't agreed to power. The more I tried to have real conversations about our future, the more Chloe shut down. When I mentioned wanting a small ceremony, maybe at a park or a rooftop, something that honored where I came from, she just blinked. But that's not really how my family does things, she said. They're going to expect something elegant. Elegant doesn't have to mean expensive, I argued. It kind of does, she replied. We weren't yelling. We weren't fighting. But something had changed. There was space between us now. A quiet divide neither of us wanted to name. At night, I found myself lying awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, wondering when I'd started tiptoeing through my own relationship. And then there was the conversation that truly pulled back the curtain. It happened on a Sunday morning. We were lounging in her apartment, me in one of her oversized t-shirts, her sipping oat milk lattes she had postmated from a place 3 blocks away. I mentioned wanting to include a photo of my mom at the wedding. Maybe a framed picture on a chair in the front row or part of the slideshow. She hesitated. I mean, do you think that'll make people uncomfortable? I blinked. Why would a photo of my mom make people uncomfortable? It's just, she's not here, and it might make the vibe a little heavy, you know? She is here, I said, my voice hardening. Just because she's gone doesn't mean she's not part of this. Chloe set her latte down. I'm not trying to be insensitive. I just think, we don't need to make this about the past. I stared at her. And for the first time, I felt like I was talking to a stranger. This wasn't about a wedding. It wasn't about flowers or venues or family drama. It was about who we were. And I was starting to realize that who I was, who raised me, was something she wanted to tuck into a neat little corner. To be quiet. To not embarrass her. But I wasn't embarrassed. I was proud. Proud of where I came from. Proud of my mother. Proud of the woman she raised me to be. I just wasn't sure Chloe was. When Chloe proposed, I wanted to believe it would fix everything. It had been a long week. We hadn't really been connecting. There were unresolved silences, lingering glances where I'd catch her watching me like she wanted to say something, but never did. I was tired. We were both tired. So when she suggested a weekend trip to Lake George, just the two of us, no family, no wedding talk, just quiet, I said yes, without hesitation. I needed air. We both did. The drive up was quiet, but not uncomfortable. She played old playlists we used to listen to in the early months, Phoebe Bridgers, Haim, Fleetwood Mac. I caught her humming under her breath to Dreams, and for a moment, I remembered why I loved her. She wasn't just charm and style. There was a softness underneath, a sweetness that peeked out when she felt safe. We got to the cabin late Friday afternoon. It was rustic, tucked beneath a canopy of pines with a small dock that jutted out onto the water. The air smelled like cedar and lake mud and something wild. I breathed it in like I hadn't exhaled in months. The first night was cozy. We made pasta, drank cheap red wine, and played board games by the fire. We laughed. Real, belly-aching laughter, the kind that made my cheeks hurt. And when we fell asleep tangled up in wool blankets and each other, I thought, maybe this is the reset we need. Saturday morning, she woke up early. I found her outside on the dock, wrapped in a sweater, legs dangling over the edge. She smiled when I walked over and patted the space beside her. God, it's beautiful here, she said. I could stay forever. I nodded. Yeah, me too. She turned to face me, and I could see it in her eyes, that glimmer, that nervous flicker. My heart caught. She reached into her sweater pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, and opened it. I gasped. Not because I didn't expect it, but because even after everything, even after the tension, the distance, the quiet battles, I still wanted it to be real. I know we've had a tough couple of months, she began, voice soft, hands shaking slightly. And I know my family hasn't made things easy, but when I think about my future, I see you. Always. It's you. She opened the box fully. The ring was beautiful. Simple. Classic. Nothing like her usual extravagant taste. I want to build a life with you, she said. Even if it's messy. Even if we don't agree on everything. I want to learn how to be better with you. There it was. The thing I'd been aching for. Not just love, but recognition. The acknowledgement that we were different, that our pasts didn't match, and that it mattered. I stared at the ring, then back at her. And I said yes, but even as the word left my mouth, something pulled at me deep inside. Not doubt, exactly, but hesitation. A pause. A whisper. Is this love, or is this hope wearing a mask? We spent the rest of the weekend like people in a movie. Photos on the dock, pancakes in bed, slow dances on the porch while mosquitoes circled our ankles. She held me like I was precious. And for the first time in weeks, I believed we could really make it. When we returned to the city, reality waited at the door like an unpaid bill. Everyone wanted to know about the ring. Her friends threw a surprise celebration at a rooftop bar in Soho. Her family scheduled a congratulatory brunch in Connecticut. And just like that, the reset evaporated. At brunch, Chloe's mother inspected the ring like she was a jeweler. Classic, she said. Tasteful. I'm glad you didn't go with anything too trendy. Then she looked at me. And you said yes. Brave girl. That was her version of a compliment. I looked at Chloe, hoping for backup. A squeeze of the hand. A mom, don't. Anything. Nothing. We got back into the car, and I sat quietly for 10 minutes before finally saying, "You didn't say anything." Chloe kept her eyes on the road. "What do you want me to say?" "She's excited." "That's her way." "No, that's her tone," I said. "There's a difference." Chloe sighed. "It's not worth turning every little moment into a fight." "I'm not trying to fight. I just want to feel like I'm not walking into a lion's den every time I see your family." "They're not lions, Emily. They're people. Flawed people. You can't expect them to just change overnight." I bit my tongue. Because the truth was, I wasn't asking them to change. I was asking her to stop shrinking me to fit their mold. The next few weeks were a blur of dress appointments, venue tours, and food tastings. Chloe's family offered to handle most of it. I offered ideas. Small things, personal touches, details that reflected who we were, but they were usually brushed aside. When I mentioned including a poem Linda used to read to me in the ceremony, her mom smiled and said, "Oh, honey, that's sweet. But we already hired a professional officiant. Keeps things cleaner." Cleaner. As if my mother's voice was dirt on white linen. I went home that night and cried in the shower until the water ran cold. I stared at the ring on my finger and wondered who I was becoming. The proposal had been real. So had Chloe's love. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the story we're writing with someone doesn't match the one we've written inside ourselves. And slowly, quietly, the hesitation started to outweigh the hope. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The night it all fell apart started like any other formal dinner in the Whitmore family home, elegant, over-orchestrated, and mildly exhausting. Chloe had warned me. "They're going all out tonight," she said, slipping on diamond earrings as we got ready. "Just smile and keep your wine glass full. It helps." It was supposed to be a celebration, a kind of pre-engagement dinner before the engagement party. Her mother called it an intimate family gathering. There were 40 guests. I wore a soft navy dress that Linda would have loved, simple, structured, with sleeves that fluttered when I moved. I'd pinned a gold locket to the inside, one of the only things I had of hers. Inside was a photo of her on our front porch, smiling wide, sun in her eyes, a little frizzy from summer heat. It wasn't polished or posed, but it was real. I wanted her there with me. Before we left, I took the photo out and placed it in a silver frame I'd bought earlier that week. It wasn't meant to be a statement, just a presence. Something of her, in a room where no one seemed to remember that I had come from somewhere, too. When we arrived at the Whitmore estate, I tucked the frame into my bag and brought it in. Chloe was too busy greeting guests to notice. The dining room table looked like something out of a royal banquet, crystal, floral arrangements, hand-lettered name cards. I was seated between Chloe's Aunt Meredith and her cousin Grant, both of whom I'd learned to navigate like a diplomatic mission. After appetizers, during a lull in the conversation, I took a deep breath and pulled out the framed photo. I placed it gently on the table in front of me, next to my wine glass. Grant noticed first. He leaned over, squinting. "Who's that?" he asked. "My mom," I said, smiling. "I wanted her here tonight." "In a way." He nodded, shrugged. "Cute." Then Meredith leaned in. She let out a short, airy laugh, the kind that trails after gossip. "Oh, that's her mother," she said, glancing at Chloe across the table. I looked up, brows tight. "She's smiling like she just won the lottery," Meredith chuckled. "Or like someone told her she could finally quit that, what was it again? Retail?" The table rippled with light laughter. Polite, restrained. Ugly. I felt the air punch out of me. Not because of the words, though they stung, but because Chloe didn't say a thing. Not one word. She looked at the photo, then looked away. My cheeks burned. I picked up the frame and clutched it to my chest. "I'm sorry," I said, more to myself than anyone. I didn't realize bringing a picture of my dead mother would be amusing. A few heads turned. Silence dropped like a curtain. Chloe cleared her throat. Maybe not here, okay?" And that was it. That was the moment. The snap. The fracture that had been building beneath my ribs for weeks, months. Maybe even from the beginning. I stood up. My chair scraped the marble floor with a sharp, unforgiving sound. "No, Chloe," I said, voice shaking. "Here is exactly where I should say it." She stood too, reaching for me. "Can we just go talk? In private?" I stepped back. "I brought a photo of the woman who gave up everything so I could sit at this godforsaken table, and your family laughed at her. And you let them. That's not fair." "No? What's not fair is spending a year trying to shrink myself into your life, hoping one day you'd stop acting like where I come from is some kind of inconvenience. You're blowing this out of proportion." "No," I said. "You're just used to everyone staying quiet so things look nice on the outside." The room was frozen. Forks midair. Glasses clutched tightly. Her mother stood at the end of the table, lips pursed like she was about to scold a child. I turned to her. "You don't know anything about Linda Walker. But let me tell you something. She worked 2 jobs and still made my birthdays feel magical. She taught me to never let people like you make me feel small." Her mouth parted slightly, shocked. "I don't care about your legacy or your linens. I care about love. Real love. The kind that doesn't flinch when things get uncomfortable." Then I looked at Chloe. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She just looked tired. Like she didn't know what to do with the version of me standing in front of her. "I loved you," I said softly. "I still do. But I can't marry someone who won't defend me. Who won't defend her." Chloe whispered, please." I shook my head. "You asked me to be part of your world, Chloe. But you never made space for mine." I left the photo on the table. Then I walked out. The silence after a storm isn't peaceful. It's disorienting. Like the world hasn't caught up to what just happened. That night, I didn't go back to Chloe's apartment. I wandered for hours instead, my phone vibrating endlessly in my pocket. I didn't check it. I couldn't. Every buzz felt like a sharp elbow to the ribs. I ended up on the Brooklyn Bridge, leaning against the railing, watching headlights blur beneath me. My breath fogged in the cold air. My heart pounded not from fear, but from release. The kind that only comes when you've said something you were never supposed to say out loud. The image of Linda's photo still sat in my mind. That smile, that sunlight, that joy that no one at that table could understand, because they didn't know what it meant to scrape and sacrifice for someone else's future. But I did. I had carried her in that frame, hoping anyone, would see her the way I did. Instead, they laughed. And Chloe didn't laugh. But she didn't stop them either. That distinction mattered. And it broke me. When I finally got home, my apartment, my space, my safe corner of the world, I dropped onto the couch and stared at the ceiling. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything unsaid, all the compromises I'd made to fit into someone else's life, like trying to wear a suit tailored for someone taller, thinner, quieter. I finally checked my phone. 10 missed calls. 6 texts. Chloe, please come back. I didn't know what to say. I froze. I'm sorry. Chloe, that wasn't okay. What they said. I know that now. Chloe, I love you. Please let me explain. Please. I didn't reply. Not out of anger, but exhaustion. I didn't want another apology whispered in private. I wanted someone who would stand beside me loudly. The next morning, Jules came over. She brought coffee and breakfast sandwiches, didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me while I stared at the wall. Then finally, she asked, "You okay?" "No," I said. "But I think I will be." I told her everything, every cruel comment, every moment Chloe turned away instead of turning toward me, every time I tried to shrink my grief into something more palatable. She listened, eyes wide with anger. "Jesus," she whispered. "I don't know how you lasted as long as you did." I shrugged. I kept hoping love would fix it. Love doesn't fix people. It reveals them. She was right. And for the next few days, I let myself feel everything. The grief, the anger, the shame, the doubt. I replayed moments I'd buried, subtle humiliations disguised as jokes, Chloe's tendency to praise me privately but correct me publicly, how she once told me I was more elegant when I didn't talk about the past. Every time I thought about calling her, I imagined walking back into a world where I'd have to apologize just to exist fully. I couldn't do that. Not again. By midweek, Chloe sent a longer message. "Chloe, I messed up. Not just that night, but all the moments before it. I wanted to believe that if I loved you hard enough, my family would come around. But I should have fought for you. I should have fought for her. I see that now. I've called them all. Told them they were wrong. That what they did was cruel. That I'm ashamed of myself. But I understand if it's too late. I just want you to know I did love you. I still do. And you were never small. I was just too scared to grow." I cried reading that. Not because it made me want to go back, but because it was the first time I believed she finally saw me. But it wasn't enough. Apologies don't undo damage. They only name it. And sometimes, naming it too late still leaves you alone in the wreckage. That weekend, I visited my mom's grave for the first time in over a year. I brought fresh sunflowers, her favorite, and sat cross-legged in front of the headstone. "I brought your picture to dinner," I told her. And they laughed. I felt my throat close up. But I didn't let them get away with it. I walked out. You would have been proud. The wind rustled through the trees above, and for a moment, I swore I felt her hand on my back, gentle, warm, steady. "I'm sorry I let anyone treat your memory like a burden," I whispered. "That stops now." When I stood to leave, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet click. Like I'd finally turned the right key in a lock that had been jammed for years. That night, I took off the ring. I didn't cry. I just placed it in a box and tucked it into the back of my closet. Sometimes letting go isn't a moment of fire or fury. Sometimes it's a breath, a choice, a soft goodbye. I didn't mean to start writing the letter. It just happened. One quiet afternoon, about 2 weeks after the dinner, I was sitting at my kitchen table, sorting through a stack of old notebooks. Most were half filled with grocery lists and scattered poetry, notes from nonprofit meetings or to-do lists long since irrelevant. But one of them was different, a small, cloth-bound journal with sunflowers on the cover. Linda had given it to me in college. "Write when it hurts," she said. "And write when it doesn't. You'll want to remember both." So I wrote. Not for Chloe. Not for closure. Not even for my mom. I wrote for me. The first sentence came like an exhale. "Dear Chloe, I loved you like I was trying to build a bridge back to something I'd never had." I stared at it for a while. Then the words poured out, slow at first, then like a flood I'd held back for months. I told her about the first night we met. How she'd laughed at something I said, eyes shining like the whole room disappeared. I told her how I used to lie awake watching her breathe, thinking, this is what it feels like to be chosen. But I also told her the truth. That I started shrinking the moment I met her family. That I stopped talking about Linda in front of them because I didn't want to see their eyes glaze over. That I hated how often I looked to her for approval instead of standing in my own certainty. "You didn't ask me to change, Chloe. But you never stopped me when I did." I wrote about the little wounds, how her mother once said, "Some people are just born elegant," and looked directly at me. How her sister made jokes about budget bridesmaids that Chloe laughed at, even as I sat right there. How I smiled through it all, believing love meant swallowing the sharp edges. Maybe you loved me, but you loved me most when I was quiet. The hardest part to write was this. I don't hate you. I just stopped waiting for you to choose me out loud. I didn't sign it. I didn't send it. I folded the pages, placed them inside the sunflower journal, and slid it back onto the shelf. Some words aren't meant to be delivered. They're meant to set you free. In the days that followed, I started to feel something unexpected. Stillness. Not peace exactly, but presence. I noticed things again. The way the morning light hit the floorboards in my apartment. The sound of my neighbor's wind chimes. The way my coffee tasted stronger when I wasn't rushing. I met Jules for brunch and didn't feel the urge to explain anything. She didn't ask. Just clinked her mimosa against mine and said, "To returning to yourself." At night, I went on long walks with my headphones in, playing music I hadn't touched in years. Old songs my mom used to sing when she cooked. Nina Simone. Joni Mitchell. Sometimes, I imagined Linda walking beside me, humming under her breath, nodding at the things I finally had the strength to let go of. One night, I passed a little thrift shop and noticed a framed sign in the window. It said, "You are allowed to leave the story halfway through if it no longer fits the person you're becoming." I stopped and stared at it for a long time. My breath caught in my throat. There had been so many times I'd stayed in places that didn't honor me, relationships, jobs, friendships, because I thought endurance was proof of love. But endurance without joy is just survival. And I was done just surviving. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. No return address, but I recognized the cursive immediately. Chloe. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Emily. I've rewritten this letter so many times, and every version still feels like not enough. But I owe you words that don't run, don't shrink, and don't ask you to carry my guilt. Asterisk. I watched you walk out of that dinner with more strength than I've ever had. And as much as it broke me, I was also quietly proud. Because you showed up for yourself in a way I never learned how to do. You were never small. I just didn't know how to love someone who wouldn't fit in the spaces I made. That's on me. You don't owe me another second. But if part of you ever wants to talk, not about fixing things, just understanding them, I'm here. And no matter what, I'll always be grateful that, for a while, I got to love someone as brave as you. Chloe. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the back of the same journal. It didn't bring closure. It didn't change anything, but it honored something that mattered. Sometimes, the people we love can't go with us. Not because they're bad, but because they're not growing in the same direction. And that doesn't erase the love. It just draws a boundary around it. A soft border between was and wasn't meant to be. Spring came early that year. It showed up in small ways at first. The crocuses pushing through sidewalk cracks, the way the sun lingered just a little longer in the evening. And inside me, something else was shifting too. I wasn't just healing. I was rebuilding. It started with a job. A community center near Flatbush posted an opening for a program coordinator, a role focused on youth mentorship, local events, and outreach. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. The kind of work my mother would have called honest hands-on good. I applied without hesitation. The director, a warm woman named Patrice with salt and pepper locks and the calm of someone who'd seen it all, interviewed me over tea at a folding table surrounded by flyers for food drives and book swaps. "You've got the heart," she said. "The rest we can teach." I started the following Monday. The first few weeks were a blur of paper cuts, coffee-stained spreadsheets, and getting hugged by kids sticky from after-school snacks. It was chaos. It was loud. It was life. I came home every night exhausted but full in a way I hadn't felt in years. One afternoon, while helping a group of teenage girls prepare for a spoken-word showcase, one of them, Jasmine, 16, all sarcasm and sharp eyeliner, asked, "Miss M, why you always looking out the window like you in a music video?" The room burst into laughter, but I smiled and shrugged. "Because some days, I'm just glad I made it through." She tilted her head. "Yeah, I feel that." We locked eyes, and in that second, I knew. This was where I belonged. Not in dinner parties where my mother's name was a punchline. Not beside someone who only loved the parts of me that could pass. But here, with the kids. With the chaos. With the life that looked a lot more like my past than I ever dared admit. I also started reconnecting with old friends I'd drifted from, with neighbors I used to only smile at in passing, with myself. One Saturday morning, I pulled out a box of my mom's things from the closet. I hadn't opened it since the funeral. Inside were worn photo albums, her favorite coffee mug, chipped, still smelling faintly of cinnamon, and a stack of her journals. I hesitated before opening one. The first entry was dated June 12, 2003. Emily lost her first tooth today. She was scared it meant something was wrong. I told her losing things isn't always bad, it's just how we make room for the new. I clutched the book to my chest and laughed through tears. God, I missed her. But more than anything, I missed the version of me that believed her words. Losing things isn't always bad. Maybe she'd been preparing me all along. I started volunteering at a local writing workshop on Thursday nights, nothing big. Just a small circle of women reading poems and short stories over tea and crumbling banana bread. But it felt like home. One evening, we were asked to bring a story about a place you thought you'd never return from. Most people shared about grief, illness, or failed marriages. I shared about a dinner table in Connecticut. I brought a photo of my mom, I said, voice steady. They laughed. And the person I loved didn't stop them. That night, I walked out. I left behind a version of myself that had been begging to be seen. There was a long silence after I finished. Then an older woman with silver braids and deep, knowing eyes said, "That's not just survival, baby. That's revolution." And maybe it was. Maybe choosing yourself, quietly, steadily, day after day, is a kind of revolution. Weeks passed. The rings stayed in the box. Chloe's letter remained unread a second time, folded like a paperweight on memory. I thought about her sometimes. Not in a yearning way, but with a soft ache. Like the way you remember an old house, beautiful, flawed, filled with things you can't carry into your next chapter. Sometimes love is real. And still wrong. Sometimes love is a lesson. One rainy Tuesday, I took the day off and went to visit Linda's old neighborhood. The bodega still smelled the same, coffee, bleach, and fresh rolls. Mr. Alvarez was still behind the counter, older now, but just as gruff. "Emily," he said, squinting. I nodded. Hey. He gave me a look that was half disbelief, half joy. Your mama used to send you in here for milk and scratch tickets. I remember, I said, laughing. He stared at me for a beat, then said, she was proud of you. You know that, right? I think she still is. When I left, I walked by our old apartment. It had new paint, new curtains, but the same crooked mailbox. I stood there a long time, soaking in the rain, the past, the weight of everything I'd carried to get here. I touched the locket around my neck, hers, now mine, and whispered, I'm okay, Mom. And, for the first time, I meant it. It was a Tuesday when I got the invitation. I had just finished an exhausting shift at the community center and was sprawled on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through my phone when I saw it. Subject: an invitation from Chloe. I almost deleted it without reading. Almost. But then I paused. And opened it. Emily. I'm not sure where to even begin. I've thought about sending this email 100 times, and every time, I hesitate, afraid of your response, or worse, that you'll delete it without a word. But I have to try. I know we left things broken, and I know I'll never undo what happened. But I want to say one last thing, not to fix everything, but just to say it. You deserve that. You deserve the truth. I've spent a long time thinking about what happened, about me, about you, about us, and I realize I never truly gave you the respect you deserved. I let fear guide me instead of love, and that's something I will always regret. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Not for us to start again, but just to finally speak my truth. I'm coming to New York next weekend for a conference. I'd like to meet just for a coffee, just to talk. No expectations. Just to clear the air if that's something you might want. If you're open to it, let me know. Chloe. I read the email twice, then 3 times. I didn't know what I expected to feel, but it wasn't this. The words weren't heavy or angry. They were sincere. Maybe too sincere. But also unfamiliar. Chloe had always been good at sending me the kind of messages that made me feel small. But this was different. She wasn't trying to shrink me anymore. She was simply asking for a chance to speak. And I knew, deep down, that I couldn't ignore this. I spent the rest of the evening pacing, staring at the email on my screen, not sure if I should respond or simply let it go. Part of me wanted to block her out completely, to keep her in the past, where she belonged. But another part of me, the part that had grown over the past few months, knew that closure wasn't something I could avoid forever. Even if the closure wasn't the kind I'd envisioned. I took a deep breath, gathered my thoughts, and began typing. Subject: an invitation from Chloe. Chloe. Thank you for reaching out. I can't say this will be easy, but I'm open to hearing what you have to say. I've spent a long time working through everything, some things I didn't even realize needed to be processed. I think meeting for coffee could be a good idea. I'm not sure what it will look like or what will come from it, but I'll meet you next Saturday. Let me know the time and place. Emily. After I hit send, I sat back and let out a shaky breath. There it was. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I didn't know if it was the right decision. But I had said yes. And that was enough for now. Saturday came quickly, and I found myself standing outside a small cafe in the West Village, feeling strangely calm. I'd spent the last few days trying to prepare myself for this, mentally, emotionally, and even physically. I wore my favorite leather jacket and a scarf that felt like it was just for me, something that made me feel like I wasn't defined by anything or anyone else. The door opened, and there she was. Chloe. She looked exactly the same, except her eyes. There was a softness in them that I hadn't seen before. Her face was still framed with the same carefully styled hair, but her posture was different. Less rigid. Like she'd shed a layer of armor. We both hesitated for a moment before she spoke. Hi, she said, her voice quieter than I remembered. You look good. I nodded, managing a small smile. You too. There was an awkward silence as we stood there, facing each other, both of us unsure of what came next. But then, she motioned for me to follow her inside, and we settled at a table near the window. She ordered tea, and I asked for coffee. The warmth felt comforting, almost like the beginning of something new. "I don't know where to start," she said, after a few moments, her hands wrapped around the cup like she was trying to hold herself together. "But I owe you an apology. For everything. For all of it. For not being the partner you needed. For letting my family's judgment control so much of what we did. For not seeing you, really seeing you. I was so wrapped up in fear that I didn't even realize I was losing the best part of my life." I listened quietly, not interrupting. It felt strange hearing her speak with such vulnerability. For so long, I had only heard her defend herself, justify her actions. But now she was just speaking the truth. "I didn't realize until after everything happened," she continued, her voice wavering. "Until I saw you walk out, I didn't understand how badly I had hurt you. I thought if I loved you enough, I could change things. But I never realized it wasn't about changing things. It was about accepting them." She paused, then added softly, "I didn't give you the respect you deserved, Em. And I'm sorry for that." The words were out there now. And in a way, they hung between us like a delicate thread. I exhaled slowly, not quite sure how to respond. I didn't feel the anger I thought I would. I didn't feel the hurt. Instead, I felt relief. Not closure, not forgiveness, but a quiet sense of acceptance. "It's okay," I said after a long pause. I think I needed to hear that more than I realized." For a while, we just sat there, letting the conversation flow naturally between us. It wasn't about fixing anything or pretending the past never happened. It was about acknowledging it. And sometimes that's all we need, to have someone admit they were wrong and to admit we've learned from it. When we finished our coffee, there was no grand goodbye, no promises of friendship or reunion. Just a quiet understanding between two people who had once loved each other and who had finally learned how to let go. "Goodbye, Chloe," I said as we stood up. She smiled softly. "Goodbye, Emily. I wish you all the best." And with that, we went our separate ways. The weeks that followed felt like I was walking through a door that had been closed for too long. The air was lighter, but also brimming with something new, possibilities, freedom, the kind of peace that only comes after making hard choices. I didn't know if I would ever feel the same way about love or relationships. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But what I did know was that I was beginning to see myself clearly. For the first time in a long time, I was truly me. I continued working at the community center, diving deeper into my role. I had started a new after-school program for kids interested in writing. Some of the kids were shy at first, but when they began reading their stories aloud, I could see their confidence grow. I became their biggest cheerleader, just like Linda had been for me, and I felt her presence with me every time I helped them find their voices. I also started meeting up with old friends, those I'd neglected in the whirlwind of my engagement and the fallout afterward. I hadn't realized how much I distanced myself until I was finally able to reconnect. And it wasn't just about catching up, it was about rebuilding bonds that had once been lost in the noise of other people's expectations. One of those reunions was with Sarah, an old friend from college. We met at a cafe downtown, and as soon as I saw her, I knew things were different. The woman who sat across from me wasn't the one who used to apologize for everything she said and did. She was more confident, more comfortable in her own skin. "You're glowing," she said, after we'd ordered. I laughed, brushing it off. "I think it's just the relief of having a life that's mine again." She smiled knowingly. "I'm happy for you. Really." Our conversation flowed easily, just like it used to, and I realized how much I'd missed these quiet moments of friendship, no expectations, no drama, just the simple act of being seen for who I was. Later that evening, I went for a walk, enjoying the soft breeze and the way the city hummed around me. It was late, and the streets were quieter than usual. As I passed by a bookstore, a small neon sign caught my eye, "Poetry reading tonight." I hesitated for a moment, then walked inside. The event was intimate, just a small crowd, mostly regulars. But as I sat in the back, listening to the readers share their words, something inside me shifted. I realized that I'd always wanted to write not just in journals, but in a way that could reach others. The idea of sharing my own story, of standing on a stage and speaking the truths I'd held for so long, seemed possible. When the reading was over, I approached the host, a woman named Carla, and introduced myself. She had a warm smile and an energy that felt easy, comfortable. "I'm thinking about reading my own work sometime," I said, somewhat hesitantly. Carla raised an eyebrow, then smiled. "You should. We have an open mic next week. Come back and bring your voice." It was a simple invitation, but something about it felt like a door opening. A door I hadn't even realized I wanted to walk through. The following weekend, I stood at the front of a small stage in that same bookstore, reading a poem I had written about letting go and finding freedom. The room was filled with strangers, but it didn't matter. I wasn't doing this for them, I was doing it for me. When I finished, the silence lingered for just a beat, and then the applause started. Soft at first, then louder, more genuine. For the first time in ages, I felt seen, not as someone's fiancé, not as someone defined by past relationships, but as Emily, the woman who had learned to let go, to heal, to be her own person. It wasn't easy, but it had been worth it. Later that night, I received a text from my dad. It had been a few weeks since I'd seen him, but our relationship was slowly mending. He'd reached out more often, and we'd started meeting for breakfast on weekends, small steps toward rebuilding our bond. "Dad, I'm proud of you." I sat back and smiled, the weight of his words sinking in. It wasn't just about being proud of me for what I had accomplished. It was about him being proud of me for becoming the person I was always meant to be. I felt a warmth in my chest, gratefulness, acceptance, and something else, something soft and beautiful. I wasn't running away from the past anymore. I wasn't hiding from it. I was standing in it, letting it teach me and letting it shape the person I was becoming. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table, writing in my journal, I received another unexpected message. It was from Patrice, the director of the community center. "Patrice, we're putting together a new initiative to help foster creativity in underprivileged youth. I'd love for you to lead the project. I think you'd be perfect for it." I stared at the message for a while, the words slowly sinking in. It wasn't just a job offer. It was an opportunity to take everything I had learned, everything I had been through, and give it back, to pour my heart into something meaningful. The truth was, I had never known what I wanted to do with my life. I had always just followed the path others set for me. But now I could see it clearly. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be the kind of mentor that I had missed growing up, someone who believed in the potential of others, who could help them find their voice. For the first time, I felt like I was standing in my purpose. A few days later, I accepted Patrice's offer. And as I walked out of the community center, the city stretched out before me, full of people, places, and experiences waiting to be discovered. I no longer felt like I was searching for something outside of myself. I had found it. As I walked down the street, I looked up at the sky. The stars were just beginning to show themselves, small and distant, but bright nonetheless. Maybe life didn't always go as planned. Maybe it wasn't supposed to. What mattered now was that I was here, in this moment, with a future that was mine to build. And no matter what came next, I knew that I was finally strong enough to handle it. The sun was barely peeking over the skyline when I woke up that morning, a rare moment of quiet in my usually busy schedule. The soft glow of the early morning light filtered through my bedroom window, casting a warm glow across the room. It felt like a fresh start, one that I had been waiting for but hadn't quite realized was already here. As I stretched out, feeling the weight of everything I had been through, I realized something important. I had spent so much time in the past trying to fix things, trying to change myself for other people, especially for Chloe and her family. But I had learned something over these months of reflection. I was never broken to begin with. I wasn't perfect, and I would always have moments of doubt or pain. But the mistakes of my past weren't chains holding me down anymore. They were lessons. And the power to shape my future was in my hands now. The first thing I did that morning was grab my phone and text Sarah. "Me, coffee today? I need to catch up with you." Her reply came almost instantly. "Sarah, always. Meet me at our spot at 10? By the time 10 a.m. rolled around, I found myself in my favorite cafe with Sarah, sipping on a latte and laughing at the small things, how ridiculous my date with a guy from last week had been, the weird dance moves I had witnessed at a wedding last month, and how I'd accidentally dyed my favorite sweater the wrong shade of blue while trying to do laundry. It felt good to be with her. "Easy. How's the community center project going?" she asked, leaning back in her chair. "You seem so excited about it lately." "I am," I replied, smiling as I stirred my coffee. "It's exactly what I needed." I'm working with a group of teens who've been through some tough stuff. At first, they didn't want anything to do with me, but now, it feels like I'm starting to get through to them. It's honestly so rewarding. She nodded, clearly impressed. "You've always had that in you, Em. I'm so proud of you. You're doing real good." The warmth from her words filled me, and I realized how much I had been needing someone to acknowledge that, not because I was looking for validation, but because I was starting to validate myself. "I never thought I'd be doing something like this," I admitted, my voice quieting a little. "But now that I'm in it, I can't imagine doing anything else. It's like I've finally found my calling." Sarah smiled, her eyes softening. "You've always had a way of making people feel seen. You just had to see it in yourself first." That hit me harder than I expected, and I couldn't help but let out a small sigh. It was true. For so long, I had been searching for approval, for someone to tell me that I was enough. But now, with everything I had been through, I could finally see it for myself. I had always been enough. The next few days were a blur of meetings, community outreach programs, and late-night writing sessions as I worked on a new creative initiative for the youth program. But amidst the hustle and bustle, there was something different, something light and hopeful that I hadn't felt in a long time. One evening, after wrapping up a meeting with the youth mentors, I stood outside the community center, looking up at the city's skyline. The air was crisp, and the stars were beginning to the sky, their twinkling light reminding me of how far I had come. As I walked to my car, I noticed a text from my dad. "Dad, how about dinner tomorrow? Just the two of us? I've missed you." I smiled, heartwarming at his words. Our relationship had come a long way since I had first moved back to New York. It hadn't been easy, and there were still things we needed to work through, but we were finally starting to understand each other in a way that was healthy. "Me, sounds perfect. Pick me up at 6? The next evening, we sat at a small Italian restaurant in the East Village, sharing stories and laughing like we hadn't done in years. My dad talked about his recent trip to the West Coast, and I shared stories about my new program. It was normal. It was easy. And, for the first time in a long time, it felt like things were finally right between us. By the time the weekend arrived, I found myself thinking about the future again. Not the future filled with doubts or fear, but one that was full of possibilities. The community center was growing. My relationship with my dad was healing. And I had a new sense of purpose that I had never imagined for myself. It wasn't about trying to fit into someone else's mold. It was about carving out my own space in the world. But then, as I was cleaning out some old boxes in my apartment, I found something. It was a box of old letters and cards, many of them from Chloe. My heart skipped a beat as I picked up one of the letters, written during the early days of our engagement. The words were sweet and full of hope, but now they felt like a distant memory. I set the letter aside and continued sorting through the box, and as I did, I realized something. I had kept these things not because I was holding onto the past, but because they were part of my story. They were part of who I had been and who I was becoming. They weren't chains, but simply moments that shaped me. With a deep breath, I began to gently place the letters in a box for good, ready to let go. Not because I was angry, not because I wanted to forget, but because it was time. Time for new memories. Time for new stories. That night, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, looking out at the city. The lights twinkled like stars, each one representing a new beginning. For so long, I had lived in the shadows of other people's expectations. But now I was walking in the light of my own. The journey had been long, and there had been moments of doubt, of loss, and of pain. But in every step, I had learned more about myself, what I needed, what I wanted, and most importantly, what I deserved. The future was waiting for me, not as a continuation of the past, but as a new chapter one was ready to write. And this time, the pen was in my hands. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?